Hey everybody, it's me again. A reminder that I'm here for Women's Fiction Day, hashtag Women's Fiction Day, and I'm talking to some great women's fiction writers today. And my next guest, I guess if we're treating it like a TV show, is Barbara Lynn Prest, who I am excited to have here with me. So I was just telling folks that your book, Queen of the Owls, has been on lots of lists. It's getting lots of great PR. Yay. I'm seeing it all over the media. I just saw your article in Ms. Magazine, and I saw you on, oh my goodness, I can't remember, Best Books of the Summer and a few others. You must be thrilled.
I am. But it's weird. We all know how weird it is to be launching a book now. And out of one corner of your mouth, you say, I'm thrilled. And then on the other 98% of you is feeling very strange. So you're probably hearing this from other people, but in the way that I kind of embrace it or manage it is to say that I'm giving something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to offer something to the world. It's not about me. It's about the stories that have always touched us over time. Stories are where we turn for inspiration, for healing, for growth, for renewal. So that's what I'm trying to hold to.
I think it works. We all want books right now, right? I'm reading like crazy myself. I accidentally showed everyone my reading habit earlier, where I love to lie and read books. So tell us more about Queen of the Owls. It's a fascinating story. I think it's a really interesting premise.
Well, thank you. And again, if people haven't heard about the book, there are no owls in it, right? It's just, people ask me at these interviews, when did you start being interested in owls? So the owl is the protagonist who has been this sort of brainy bookworm type and needs to find, claim, integrate her whole self. So here's like a funny thing about this, Lainey, which is that we're talking Women's Fiction Day, right? Okay. Well, so the book is framed around the art and life of painter Georgia O'Keeffe, which is like a whole cool thing. But of course, O'Keeffe is famous for saying that she didn't want to be thought of as a woman artist, just an artist. So I kind of wonder what she would think of the idea of women's fiction. It's sort of ironic, right? But I prefer to think of it as fiction that takes us on an inner journey, not just an outer one. And I love it when I get an occasional message from a guy who's read the book. In fact, this is another funny story. I made my ex-husband read a copy of it. Well, whatever. It's the least he could do for me. So, we talked. No, we're friends. So, of course, what'd you think of it? And he says, it really opened my eyes to what it was like to see the world from a woman's perspective. And I go, it's a little late, honey.
But it's interesting. These books that, like, I think of women's fiction as like my target reader when I'm writing my book is definitely a woman. Like my book's all about sexism in Silicon Valley. And like, as I was thinking of who was reading this book, it was definitely not like my cousin Paul, for example. But funnily enough, my cousin Paul, who's on the early reader team, who's in the UK, read it, loved it, and said he's giving it to his daughters to read. So go figure, just because there's a genre or a brand name that is really about, like you say, stories of interchange and growth, right? And I think that's very true about your book, Queen of the Owls. Like, just because that is a moniker we gave to it doesn't mean it can only be in that box, right? Like many books are in several categories. I can think of many women's fiction writers who are also historical fiction writers, and they write historical women's fiction, and they're bestsellers in both categories, right? In the women's fiction category, in the historical women's fiction category, in the historical category. So I think it's just, to me, it's just a way to help people find the kind of books that might appeal to them, if that makes any sense.
No. It's just a funny thing because O'Keeffe herself did not want to be defined by her gender. And she fought that her whole life. I mean, when she first started painting, the men wanted to interpret her work very sexually. And then later,
those famous flower paintings,
but then
right?
50 years later, the feminists in the 70s wanted to interpret her work to say what they thought it ought to mean about being a woman. And she just repudiated all of it. So again, the book's not about Georgia O'Keeffe either. It's not about owls, and it's not about O'Keeffe. It's about a woman, contemporary woman, who's wanting to understand O'Keeffe intellectually, but she's taken on a journey of how to understand O'Keeffe through her body. And in doing so, comes to really become embodied and claim her own body. So O'Keeffe is the foil. She's the frame. But she doesn't walk across the stage and, you know, drink coffee. She's present as the muse or something for the protagonist who is, you know, contemporary. So.
And what got me about the description of your book is, I mean, your main character poses for naked photos from an artistic
You're freezing
perspective,
on me.
right? Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So you're can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was saying your main character poses for naked photos from an artistic perspective of really trying to relate to Georgia O'Keeffe. And then when those photos, without her permission, are released to the world, she has to deal with how she feels about that. But also, everybody's interpreting it differently is one of the things I think is fascinating about your book, right? Like when something like that happens, there are so many interpretations and everyone likes to put our own judgments on each other. You know, to some people it's an act of feminism and to some people it's a godless thing and I can't believe you did that. And it reminds me a little of some of the conversations right now that we're all having around what should I do on social media? How do I support Black Lives Matter? What's the right approach? And like everybody has their own interpretation. You can have one gesture, but it can be interpreted 100 different ways.
Well, that's kind of a parallel process because that's what happened in O'Keeffe's life, of course. It happens to my protagonist and it's happening all around us in real time. Absolutely. So one of the questions is, in the search for who am I, can I live without a rigid narrative? I mean, that's part of, everyone wants to give someone else a narrative, but who am I really? And part of the question with the book is, how do I embrace the part I've denied or neglected or been afraid of or didn't think mattered or whatever it is, and how to be that whole person that I yearn to be. And I feel like that's a timeless question, a timeless journey, and it can be understood in the context of 2020 or not necessarily, for sure. And you know, there's always context.
Right.
But how do I live honorably? How can I be true to myself and yet do right by those in my life whom I care about? Because that's part of what Elizabeth, my protagonist, she doesn't want to find herself at the expense of the people in her life, but rather what's behind that. So yeah,
I think it's a fascinating idea for an exploration, and I did promise I would keep these to 5 to 7 minutes. But show us the book again. Let's make sure. Give us one more lick.
I talk for hours. But
and also,
I just have to say one thing.
Tell me about your. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing in terms of like people always ask me about my research, and you know I did a lot of things. I visited O'Keeffe's homes. I went to exhibits of her work. I talked to people who had studied her. I did not pose nude. Yet. You ready? No.
Okay. I'm ready.
Here we go. No. But it's and I had to understand what she experienced in its emotional essence. But anyway, O'Keeffe just kind of found me. So I'm not an art history person. I'm an old.
So. Relative to that, I think you have a giveaway that you're doing today for Women's Fiction Day. Is it on your website? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, on Facebook actually. But you know, I didn't want to do something where you only have one winner. One person wins, they get a free book. So who writes to me through my website, it's pretty obvious, www.BarbaraLynnProbst. I'm giving a free packet of material about Georgia O'Keeffe, stuff that I've learned, acquired, links to videos, articles, you know, collections of her paintings, things like that, because I just didn't want to have one winner. Why not share? So that's what I'm doing.
Perfect. And you said they can find that on your website, or on your Facebook?
Send me an email.
Okay. Perfect. And so, while you're there, while you're on Barbara's website, go check out the book, Queen of the Owls. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, well, of course. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you so much. Be well.